will try my best to speak as if I'm shouting. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you colleagues at a very difficult time in the country. Many of us believe so. We believe that we're living in a very difficult and challenging time in Swaziland in times of change. But let me begin by saying that the struggle that has been waged by the people of Swaziland emanates from what we think to be values that the world has accepted to be fundamental for all nations of the world. I think we all appreciate that in 1948, after the 2 world wars, the world agreed that without human rights, there can be no dignity for any group of people. And the fundamental rights are the basic, essentials for a dignified society. And we in Swaziland have been denied these rights for a long time. I can say that for the past 38 years, we have been living without fundamental human rights in the country. And therefore, as I speak to the context and how the country is right now, it is important to understand that that's the background. I can just say very briefly that the country, obtained independence from the British in 1968, through a written constitution with the Bill of Rights. But in 1973, April 12, the late King Sobuza II, who is the father of the current king, unlawfully abrogated the constitution and imposed himself and the monarch as the supreme ruler of the country without checks and balances. It is the view of the Swazi people that that situation does not augur well for Swaziland, and it has existed until today. And in 2005, the new king, King Mswati III, attempted to introduce a new constitution in which he made the world and the people to believe that we are marking a new era for Swaziland. Chapter 3 of the constitution guarantees, or attempts to guarantee, fundamental rights and freedom. But the view that we have taken is that you cannot have respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms under a system that lacks checks and balances. The fundamental principle of a democratic society is that you must have at least, separation of powers. You must have an independent parliament, you must have an independent judiciary, you must have an executive which is subject to limitations by the laws of the country. But obviously in Swaziland, these things don't exist because the king is the ultimate authority. His powers are limited, he's not subject to the constitution. He doesn't account to the people, he doesn't account to parliament. You can't even take him to court, in the event that you've been violated. And I think this is important because the context of the country is that culture and tradition remains very strong. And the king governs the country using more of his traditional powers as opposed to what may be viewed as modern concept of democracy. And therefore, as a traditional ruler, is not accountable for anything that he does. And therefore, the human rights in Swaziland are subject to culture and custom, which the court, may not question. So that's the brief background of Swaziland. It is important, therefore, to say that the 2005 constitution has been, rejected by those who believe that the country must move towards a democratic dispensation, which will respect the rights of the people. And that is why today, if one looks at the internet, you find that there's a call for some kind of a revolution, an uprising. That's what people are saying, because the system is just not sustainable. We say that the current regime and the monarch has run down the country and the economy to its knees. And I've just seen today on the media that the Minister for Foreign Affairs was in South Africa to appeal to the world, to support, continue to support the regime. Because even the economic meltdown, they can't, pay civil servants, they can't afford to provide basic needs to the people of Swaziland. And therefore they've been to the IMF, they've been to the World Bank, they've been to the African Bank to appeal for financial support. But our view is that even if the world were to support, make money available to the regime, that is not resolving the issue. Because the problem of the country is the system of government that exists. Without checks and balances, obviously, no matter how much amount of money made available to the government, it will go down the drain because nobody's there to account for it. And perhaps it is from that point of view that it is appropriate for me, on behalf of the democratic movement in Swaziland, to appeal that whilst the king and the government appeals for this kind of support, they must be denied. Because doing so would be to perpetuate the oppression and not resolving the fundamental problem. I think it's important to say that there is consensus within the democracy movement in Swaziland that the current crisis cannot be resolved by the current regime because they're responsible for the crisis. You therefore need a new regime to take the country forward, hence the call for democracy. I am informed by my colleagues on the ground that April 12th of this month is the date on which the action must begin. Perhaps in the same fashion as we've seen in Tunisia or Egypt and recently as we've seen in Libya. But the fear is what will be the response from the government? Are they going to accept that people are calling for change, or they're going to resist and react that like regimes of time, use force against the peaceful movement for change? And I think on that note, one must appeal that we ask the world to send a clear message to the king and the government that as opposed to resisting change and transformation, you must embrace it and talk to those people who are saying it's time for a new dispensation for Swaziland. Let me address a couple more issues. The role of civil society. As I'm gathered here speaking to people who work a lot with civil society. One must say that the movement for democratization in Swaziland has been spearheaded mostly by civil society working together with the banned political parties. There are at least two major political parties in Swaziland now which we believe that will be competent and equipped to take us to a new era. One of them was formed in 1983, the People's United Democratic Movement, led by a man who's continued my client in my work as an attorney, Mario Masuku. The other political party is called the Ngwane National Liberatory Congress, NNLC, which is an oldest party formed during the days of the fight for independence. They've continued to work together with Pudemo and other groups to push for change in Swaziland. We therefore believe that civil society must continue to collaborate with the political leaders to demand change in Swaziland. But if we speak about the role of civil society, we must speak about it also in the context of the international community. People like you colleagues in this room, what do we expect of you to do for Swaziland? We believe that you can call upon your government to say that the oppression has been long enough in Swaziland. And we have seen at least the Western democracies calling for change in other countries. We've seen them in Tunisia, for instance. We've seen them doing the same thing in Egypt. And we're seeing them today doing it in Libya. And we believe that it should be done for Swaziland. It has been done in Zimbabwe, which is just next door to Swaziland. And they continue to mount pressure on the Mugabe regime, even at this moment, to stop using violence against these people as they move towards an election. So it is our appeal that a similar message must be sent to the Swaziland regime. And the critical question, as I wind down so we can begin in some form of dialogue, is whether it is possible to achieve peaceful change in Swaziland. I think I must say that most of us feel that there's been a misunderstanding of the whole concept of an uprising and revolution. My government in Swaziland has equated revolution and an uprising to violence. But the fact of the matter is that when people engage in a struggle for change through a revolution and uprising, it's not violence. They just come together to say, we're going to protest in numbers. That's what they did in Tunisia, as far as I understand. They didn't engage in acts of violence. They did the same thing in Egypt. But the people who are the first to engage in violence today is the state. They are the ones who respond with force against peaceful protesters. And therefore, we do support the movement for an uprising because we believe it is the only tool that people can use to achieve peaceful change. The opposite of that is to engage in some kind of an armed struggle. And I think most of us have seen countries of the world, South Africa, after trying to push for change in a peaceful method, ultimately to come to a point where they said that you cannot talk peace to a regime that responds violently to defenseless and unarmed citizens. We believe that this is the best chance for Swaziland to engage in a peaceful change. I have not heard any of the leaders of the revolution calling for an armed uprising. They are saying we're calling our people to fill up the streets in a peaceful protest. And we're calling for this government to resign so that we can engage in a process of negotiations that will lead the country to a democratic transition. And I think logical and rational thinking people of the world must embrace such a call. And I have a duty, therefore, to call upon you to support this revolution. I must conclude that, as you said, that we are doing a lot of work in Swaziland with the women's group and the young girls. The situation is that Swaziland is an African country that's still embedded in culture and tradition, as I've said. And therefore, it is my view, which is shared by many, that the women movement in Swaziland is being undermined, by the abuse of culture to keep them as minors. In law you say that women are like children. And our custom has been abused a lot to keep women in that status. Even as we speak, that the country has a Bill of Rights. It is our view that you can't have a Bill of Rights hanging in the air. The environment must be conducive for its enforcement and respect. And I think those who drafted the Constitution in Swaziland were very clear that they want the role of culture to remain dominant in a so-called constitutional state. And it's inconsistent with democratic values of government. And it is the view that we share that once we speak about the rights of women in our countries, and in my country specifically, we need to do so understanding that it is difficult to speak about the rights of women under an environment which is hostile to human rights in general. I'm happy that the slogan that the women's movement have adopted is the one that said that women's rights are human rights. And therefore, once we speak to women's rights, we must talk to the broader agenda, for human rights to ensure that everybody at least enjoys the basic rights. And then we can say there are groups who have been disadvantaged, for reasons of historical justification. And those ones need special attention in a democratic dispensation. And we have seen that happen I'm glad that we've learned from South Africa, we've learned from Namibia after the fall of the regimes there, that you do need to emphasize on paying specific attention to groups which have been previously disadvantaged by oppressive regimes. I think let me end there for now, and I hope that you can begin in a discussion and then I can expand on some of the issues that I've raised. Thank you very much for attention.